Okay, so we're now up to the last section of this lesson where we're going to be using some of the terminology from the previous section in order to carry out a number of different crosses using Punnett squares in order to find out how different characteristics are passed from generation to generation. So this particular area, we'll be looking at the syllabus dot point. Describe outcomes of monohybrid crosses involved in simple dominance using Mendel's explanations, and solve problems using monohybrid crosses using Punnett squares or alternate techniques. Okay, so monohybrid, when we look at the word mono, we just mean one. So one trait, and we'll be using Punnett squares, which look a bit like a multiplication grid once we set them all up in order to work out how those traits are passed from one generation to the next. So what we're going to do is work through a couple of examples together, and then you will have a go at doing some yourself. So this is worked example number 1. In garden peas, round peas are dominant to wrinkled peas. If you crossed a homozygous dominant plant with a homozygous recessive plant, what would the genotypes and phenotypes be of the offspring? Okay, so before we get started, the first thing I always do is underline different parts of the question that contain important information. So here it tells us that round peas are dominant to wrinkled peas. We don't really need to look at wrinkled peas. As long as we know that round peas are dominant, then we've got enough information there. So now we want to cross a homozygous dominant plant with a homozygous recessive plant. Okay, and the bits of information that we need to provide in our answer in order to be correct is the genotype and the phenotype. Okay, so we need to provide both of these things in order to be able to get full marks. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is have a look at our two different parents. So parent 1, okay, is homozygous dominant. So remember, homozygous is the same and dominant. So let's assign a letter to our alleles. Remember, we need a letter that's going to look different, capital and lowercase, so it's easy to distinguish. So in this case, if we're looking at round, let's use the letter R. So if we're crossing homozygous dominant plant, they have two big R's. And then parent 2 is homozygous recessive. So again, two of the same alleles, this time they're recessive. So little r, little r. So the next thing we need to do is draw this Punnett square that I mentioned in the last slide. So a Punnett square, when we draw it, it looks a little bit like a noughts and crosses grid. Okay, nice and simple, easy to draw. Then what we do is we put one parent across the top and one parent down the side. Now it doesn't really matter which one goes where, okay, just as long as you remember that one goes on one side and one goes on the other side. Okay, then what we do is work it out just like a multiplication grid. So we can bring all of the top letters down. So our big R's can come down this way, and then our little r's go across. Okay, so then we just simply fill in all of the spaces, and what we can see now is that all of our offspring, okay, have the same genotype. So the genotype, remembering that the question has asked us for both the genotype and the phenotype that the offspring has, is 100% big R, little r. Now we also need to provide the phenotype. So from our genotype, we see that we have the big R, so the dominant characteristic is going to show, and we know that dominant is round, so all of them are going to be round peas. All right, let's have a go now at worked example number 2. So in humans, brown eyes are dominant over blue eyes. Okay, so as science has advanced over time, we've actually found that this isn't quite the case anymore. It is a really easy example to use, but just have a little bit of an understanding that eye color really isn't just as straightforward as dark eyes and light eyes, okay? But it is a nice example to use, and it does give us a little bit of insight into how different people get different colored eyes based on the colored eyes that their parents have. So what type of offspring would we expect if we crossed a heterozygous brown-eyed person with a heterozygous brown-eyed person? So let's again underline the important information. So brown eyes are dominant over blue. And what type of offspring would you expect if you crossed a heterozygous brown-eyed person with a heterozygous brown-eyed person? So let's again write down our two parents. Okay, so parent 1 is heterozygous, which means that they have two different alleles and they have brown eyes. So brown is dominant again. So let's assign a letter for our dominant brown eyes. Nice and easy here. We can have big B for dominant and little b for recessive. Of course, it's nice and easy to distinguish between the two. So if parent 1 is heterozygous, they have to have one of each. So their genotype is big B, little b. Then parent 2 is also heterozygous, so their genotype is also big B, little b. Then we need to create our Punnett square again. So draw our noughts and crosses grid, put parent 1 across the top, parent 2 across the side. Okay, then we bring our big B's down and our little b's down, and then our big B's across and our little b's across. Now this one here, just to point out an interesting fact, is we usually put the big letter first, okay, just because the big letter is the dominant trait, so it just helps us to understand or to easily recognize that it does possess the dominant trait if it comes first, okay? However, this is not technically incorrect. It's just really good habit to get into to put the big letter first, okay? So what type of offspring would we expect? So the genotypes here, hopefully you can see that we have 3 different genotypes at the moment. So we have this one here, we have 2, and we have 3. So our genotypes are big B, big B, big B, little b, and little b, little b. Okay, so if we have a look at the ratio of these, it would be 1 to 2 to 1. Okay, but then if we look at the phenotypes, okay, remembering anytime that big B is present, this individual is going to have brown eyes. So we only have the 2 different phenotypes. So they are brown and blue. But if we have a look at the ratio of phenotypes, our ratio is actually 3 to 1. So there's a 75% chance that this offspring is going to have brown eyes and 25% chance that this offspring is going to have blue eyes. Okay, so let's go back to looking at our Harry Potter example that we started off with. So as we know, in Harry Potter, the ability to perform magic is an inherited trait. The ability to perform magic is recessive, and those individuals who cannot perform magic, which we refer to as muggles, carry the dominant allele, so a big H. Hermione Granger is a witch who can perform magic, however both of her parents are muggles. What must the genotypes of Hermione's parents be? So again, let's go back and underline our important information. Okay, so let's go back and have a look at the important information in the question. So firstly, magic is recessive. Okay, and we've already given that a little h, whereas those that cannot perform magic or our muggles have the dominant allele, which is big H. So Hermione can perform magic, so therefore, if she can perform magic, she must have 2 of these recessive alleles. So Hermione's genotype must be little h, little h. Okay, but both her parents are muggles. We need to work out the genotypes of her parents in order for Hermione to get 2 little h's. So in order for Hermione to get 2 little h's, remember that we get one from mum and one from dad. That means that mum must have a little h and dad must also have a little h. But remember, neither of them can perform magic because they are muggles, so they also must carry the dominant allele, which means that their genotypes both must be big H, little h. Okay, so continuing on with the Harry Potter theme. Okay, the information at the top here is the same as the previous question. So just to go back through, magic is recessive. Those who cannot perform magic have the dominant allele. Okay, so in this question, it says Hermione is an only child. What would the probability be as a percentage of Hermione having a sibling who also has magical powers? Now remember from the previous slide, Hermione's parents were both big H, little h because they are muggles. But pass that little h on to Hermione. So we need to draw a Punnett square again. So parent 1 across the top, parent 2 across the side. bringing our big H's down and our little h's down, our big H across and our little h across. Okay, so now we can see again that the genotypes are big H, big H, little h, and little h, which means that the phenotypes will be muggles or magic. And we want to know what percentage of the individuals would possibly be magic. So this here, there's 1 in 4 chance, but we want to present that as a percentage from the question. So therefore, it is a 25% chance that Hermione will have a sibling with magical powers.